Hello, Bible readers. Today I'm going to blow through 46 and 47 and then take us all the way into chapter 50. Between this post and the next, we're going to complete our deep dive into Genesis. So this is good. In chapters 46 and 47, we come to the time when we settle issues between the generations. Here with a look at the past, there must be a settlement of Jacob in Egypt. How to square that circle as he dies and then he's buried. Then in a look to the future, there must be a blessing for the generations to come. That's no new theme. Brueggemann sees three themes in this section, 46 and 47. One, the family theme concerned with Jacob. Two, the imperial theme. And then three, the tension between the family and the empire. Jacob, of course, functions as the mouthpiece for the promise tradition. He's old school. Joseph is the one who demonstrates his mastery of the Egyptian ways. He'd be the new school. And the brothers are stuck in the middle between the faith of their fathers and the success of their dream brother and all the temptations that come with getting in too deep into those Egyptian ways. The tensions in this family are what push the plot. The tensions are what reveal God's hidden ways. The tensions are what draw us in. And no one feels the tension more than Joseph himself. As Brueggemann describes it, Joseph is placed between the buoyancy of the tradition and the pressure of the empire. And that is where he must live his life. It's a feeling I think many of us can resonate with. Pressure from the world coupled with the buoyancy of our tradition, our faith, all the great things we know and talk about God. And so Joseph says and does some things that are very connected to Israel, while at other times he couldn't be more Egyptian. In chapter 47, verse 11, as the Egyptian power that he is, he grants land. So now the family called to go until they come back into the possession of the promised land. Remember, Egypt is just a sidetrack for this family during a famine. Now they come to possess land somewhere else. Jacob is not a man of possession in this place. He's a man of promise. Jacob trusts the promise more than any possession. Pharaoh and Jacob are opposites, for sure. But Joseph, he's kind of in between Jacob and Pharaoh. He juggles these two ways of being, kind of trying to have it both ways in these chapters. And so Brueggemann asks the question, and this is a question for us as we feel the pressure and the buoyancy that I was talking about. Brueggemann asks, how far can one play the imperial game, even if you're playing it for the sake of God's promises, before the promise is crushed by the pressure, the force of the empire? It's kind of like Joseph is playing with fire here. And at some point, you'd think he's going to get burned. Perhaps, Brueggemann wonders, the turn toward oppression that we're going to see in Exodus, where the Israelites are enslaved, maybe that can be credited not only to Pharaoh, which would be conventional wisdom, maybe it could also, in part, be based on the compromising ways of Israel, following Joseph's lead as we see some of his behaviors in this part of Genesis. Maybe Israel got into the habit of playing the royal games and over time forgot about God's promises. We can't know all the contributing factors that led to the oppression reflected in Exodus, but it is clear that Joseph's Israel lived dangerously near the brink of Egyptianization, which is a fun word to say. I dare you to say it right now, Egyptianization. So that's a danger for the church in North America too, right? Throughout the world, really, but especially in this empire that we live in. We can get so good at the secular games, if you will, that we can forget the ways of God, the promises of God that lead to hope and faith in something greater, something better, something new. It's just the empire and all its temptations and all its strength or seemingly strength can be intoxicating and can pull us away from values that we only have in faith. Okay, and then let me start into chapters 48 to 50 through chapter 50, verse 14. I won't get to the very end. I'll take on the very end of Genesis 50 tomorrow, along with a few other things. But I wanted to start into these chapters to say that once the sons are settled into the land of Egypt, Jacob has kind of come to the end of his journey. Jacob was found, the family is fed. Now, in these chapters, 48 to 50, it is death time. This whole section is about Jacob and his family facing death, which is a really helpful piece in our world where now our culture avoids that topic at all costs. But these stories show us a little bit about how to face death faithfully amidst a family who trusts in the promise. Chapter 48 speaks to the continuity between the generations. And so as death looms, we start to ask some of the big questions. And I love this question. This is an amazing question for me to wonder about the continuity between the generations. What does that look like? What's possible? What can that mean? I mean, to think about how in just 4 generations, my great-grandfather, his values, his experiences compared to mine, what continuity do we share? I mean, what parts of my day are anything like what his days were like? We don't eat the same foods, hardly at all. What would he think pizza is? I mean, seriously. We don't experience light the same way. Plumbing? The farmhouse never had electricity or indoor plumbing in his lifetime. Medical care, education, politics, media. What would we talk about that could show any kind of continuity between our generations? Maybe faith would be the only thing. How about for Abraham and his great-grandson Joseph? I mean, people might say, oh, it's such a special example, in this technological world where we've jumped so far ahead so fast between you and your great-grandfather. Well, what about Abraham and his great-grandson Joseph? The man from nowhere, Abraham, called by God to go, and then Joseph, this brother with a Technicolor Dreamcoat, put in an Egyptian dungeon, only to be pulled up to power over all Egypt by the Pharaoh of Egypt. These two had very different lives, Abraham and Joseph. What would they talk about that would show any kind of continuity between generations? Well, Jacob knows, Joseph's dad, Jacob knows, here's what's going to provide continuity. The promise, hope, a blessing. I'm going to say more about these 3 pieces in the next post and then conclude our study of Genesis. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.